let me try to put this in the context of the wider debate on the reform of the European Union. Europe is moving towards the Sibiu European Council meeting to discuss the broad picture. We want to focus very much on matters of the Eurozone, economic governance, and the content of economic policies. I've mentioned to each of our presenters that they must keep to 5 minutes maximum, and I'm going to try to ensure that there is time for contributions and questions from the floor. So if I could perhaps start with Panos Tsakloglou. I wonder, Panos, if you were to think in terms of the design at the moment of the Eurozone, the gaps of the Eurozone in its terms of its governance, and thinking of the recent Greek experience, what would you highlight to kick us off?
Right. First of all, I would like to thank the Hellenic Observatory and Kevin Featherstone personally for inviting me to this panel. And I must say that in comparison to the rest of the people who are around, I'm probably the least knowledgeable of the topic. However, let me put in a broader kind of a context in the sense that, you know, the monetary union was supposed to be the jewel of the crown of the European integration, and the European integration was an enormously successful project. It delivered peace, it delivered prosperity, and until the beginning of the crisis, it was delivering prosperity, at least until the beginning of the crisis, and definitely it delivered stability. Now, if we look at the experience of several monetary unions that exist in history, most of the monetary unions were based on the metallic rule. Therefore, any kind of an adjustment was almost automatic. The few monetary unions that were based on fiat money, most of them were unsuccessful. They collapsed. There is one common characteristic of the unions that did survive, and the main characteristic was that they were also fiscal unions. In fact, in most cases, we had fiscal union before the monetary union. What is the reason for this? It is the usual argument that we have, let's say, about optimal currency areas. Europe was not an optimal currency area before the introduction of the euro. The problem we have in this case is that the common kind of interest rate most probably amplifies the business cycle instead of reducing it. There was the expectation that once the euro is there, most probably countries will converge to a common business cycle. Sometimes we have not seen it. And in fact, if we go even to countries like the United States of America, we can see that even America, according to several kind of indices, is not an optimal currency area. However, in the States, there is the fiscal capacity. If there is one particular area that is in recession and another one is growing fast, there is transfer of resources from the one region to the other. Something like this did not exist in Europe, and instead of this, we had the Stability and Growth Pact. For the Stability and Growth Pact, there is some theoretical background, in the sense that there are, let's say, quite strong externalities there, and as a result, we need, let's say, some kind of common rules. However, if we go to the specific numbers that is there is no theoretical foundation about it. There is no empirical evidence about this 6% or the 3% that existed there. The first years of the euro were perfectly okay. Everybody was happy. In fact, several of the theoretical predictions did take place there. There was movement of capital from the core to the periphery. The periphery bought credibility on the chip, and as a result, we had decline in the inflation rate. However, the inflation rate did remain higher than the one in the core, and as a result, these countries were losing in competitiveness. In fact, all the countries that got into troubles later on were countries that had problems in their current accounts, not in their debt levels. Countries like Italy or Belgium never got into economic adjustment programs, whereas countries like Ireland or Spain, for that matter, that initially had very low debt ratios, they got into programs. Now, during the time of the adjustment, there were several steps that were taken to fix the gap. Two-pack, six-pack, the creation of the ESM, banking union, the compact, and so on. All these things are in the right direction. However, several of these projects are still incomplete. And where we have the discussion nowadays is precisely on what should be the next steps. In my opinion, the first steps must be in the direction of completing the complete projects. Banking union is the first one. Banking union, there is one element only that remains to be completed there. It is about the guarantee of deposits. Many people say that this is not that important. I think that it is important. And why it is important? If something like this does not exist there and there is any kind of a panic, we will have outflow of capital from periphery. I have the feeling that we have, let's say, the exodus of capital that we have, of human capital we have with a brain drain. And then this is combined with exodus of monetary capital through a panic like this. Several people will start wondering why, what is the benefit of remaining in the Eurozone? Let's have, let's say, the complete collapse of it. The second element that needs to be completed is about the transformation of ESM into a European IMF. However, all these things do not solve the basic problem, the ones I mentioned before about the creation of elements of fiscal union, transfer of resources from regions that are growing to regions that are contracting. There are two ideas on the table. One of them is about having, let's say, some kind of an auxiliary unemployment insurance scheme. I have the feeling that this, sooner or later, it will work. It will deal only with cyclical unemployment, not with structural unemployment. That is something that is opposed, and I think that this rightly so, responsibility of the national governments. The second one is this famous Macron proposal there of having some kind of a stabilization budget. However, there is a good element and a bad element in this idea. The good element is that Macron focuses primarily on investments. Investment has the characteristic that increases the productive capacity of the economy in the long term, and this is a very good thing. However, an investment problem is not something that you can take out of the shelf and put it in action immediately. An investment project takes a very long time before it materializes. It is not like tax cuts, that is the other kind of thing of fiscal policy that we have there. And finally, in order to have, let's say, some kind of a full stabilization policy, all the models that we have there seem to suggest that we need substantially larger amounts of money in the region of 6–7% of total GDP. Such a huge budget definitely needs political union. Political union is something that we have in short supply, and in fact, all the recent election results that we had in all European countries seem to point in the opposite direction rather than the political union. Therefore, Kevin.
Thank you, Panos, very much. You've taken us further forward as well. Claudio, Borghi, I wonder if we focus on the idea of fiscal rules and fiscal discipline, and if we think of what's been happening in parts of the Eurozone, of course, in particular, Italy, if we think of the future of the Eurozone, are fiscal rules still useful or not?
Well, I have to say that I have little to add to what Professor Tsakloglou said before. I agree 100% of the diagnosis, and sadly, we should think about the consequences of what he said. He said that monetary union doesn't work, and in order to work, they need the fiscal transfers. And also what we heard is that fiscal transfer is additional money, and additional money is very difficult to find. The formation at the moment of the early talks about the new European budget is a clear snapshot of what we are talking about. I mean, there is the usual recipient versus country that pays divide. Impossible to propose a bigger, well, they try, but difficult to propose a bigger budget because the countries that they are net payers sees this as a bigger contribution on their side. So it means that a fiscal transfer union at the moment is not foreseeable. So if we have a dysfunctional currency area and there is no political path for for fiscal transfers, one should wonder whether we should find a radical solution or not. Because what I say sometimes when we arrive at this point of reasoning is what is the chance for Germany to pay for Italy? And usually it came out a number that is less than 0. On the other side, there is what is the chance to turn, I don't know, the south of Italy or even Greece as Germany. I don't know, to turn Naples into Frankfurt in order to make a stable and not unbalanced currency area. Also, on that side, I see 0 possibility, and not even desirability. It's not that Europe should become a big Germany. Everyone should be free to live the life that they wanted to live. So, at my point, either the only way in order to fix the thing for a while means, for example, intervention of ECB, monetization. That it's not a direct payment from the state. For example, I've said, well, the ECB in the last European Parliamentary Week in Brussels, I said, well, we are there in 1 hour arguing because we don't want to raise the budget, the other one don't want to cut the agricultural policy or something like this. Well, the central bank created in the region of 3 trillion for buying bonds on the market. If ever they decided to create 3 trillion and, I don't know, 20 billion in order to buff up the infrastructure program of the European Union on a centralized level, I don't think that there is going to be, I don't know, an earthquake or the sky will open with angels, with trumpets, because we break a taboo. It's probably once the ECB would have created 20 billion in order to fund infrastructure, we would have infrastructures. Not anymore. The cost of creating money for a central bank is inflation, and at the moment I don't see inflation as a main point of concern for the Eurozone. But even this is going to be very difficult because you have to change the treaty, because every step into a direct financing will be seen by Germany as a way to dodge the strict fiscal discipline that they would love to see, and something like this. What I see at the moment is an Europe that doesn't work, and where the poor country has additional burdens, not help. Because, for example, Italy at the moment is financing at 3%, is public debt at 3% higher than Germany. So it means that it's a system where you can't cope. Because if you are lagging, you go worse, because you are saddled with pro-cyclical situations that drags you even more on the anti-growth pattern. For example, they say, well, Italy has gotten high debt. It's the same of Greece. So you have to do austerity, but austerity eventually leads to a lower growth. A lower growth leads to a higher debt-GDP ratio. So we have tried. We have seen with Monti. We put a caretaker that implemented a very big fiscal tightening, put a big tax on properties. He cut pension expense sharply. Well, the result is that we had 13 quarters of recession. And after 13 quarters of recession, we have witnessed the debt GDP higher than 11 points, starting from the point where we started. So basically, it's how can I say? The only way that I can see at the moment to keep the thing as it is, and it's not what it's my dream to keep things as it is, because in the past I wrote a lot of articles regarding how it's possible to dismantle, control the way the Eurozone, and I still think that it's a way that we should try to think as possible. Controlled way, not unilateral. We have seen Brexit is a mess. So it's if ever anyone agrees that is dysfunctional, we can start to think how it's possible to unwind together. But if we wanted to keep it like this, the only way that I see is direct financing by ECB, because the rest is going to be to bring no progress, and if ever there is going to be some reduction of global growth, then it's going to be severe, because there is even less buffers that we have compared to the previous time. And finally, I have to say that after 20 years of the euro, the average growth of Italy after 20 years is 0. So we've got the double lost decade, and so it's hardly to consider a success, this experiment for my country, and I think for Greece also.
Thank you. Thank you. It doesn't leave us with much optimism. Iain, I wonder if you could take us forward. Where do you stand in terms of fiscal discipline, fiscal transfers, and their need for in the Eurozone governance?
All that in 5 minutes, yes, fine. Well, first on fiscal rules, to try directly to answer that question. All the reforms that we've seen in the Eurozone since 2010 have tried to strengthen fiscal rules with the intention of getting tighter fiscal discipline. Now, I'm going to let you into a secret. There's only 3 things wrong with fiscal rules. One is that they're far too complex. If you look at what's called the vademecum for just one fiscal rule, the Stability and Growth Pact, it runs to 220 pages. And with 220 pages, it's very easy for governments to find ways to seize page 163 and say, that's the reason I'm not going to follow it. The second problem with fiscal rules is they've become so complex that they are not very visible to citizens and to other economic actors. And this lack of transparency means that governments can play around them in all sorts of ways, especially when you have an interaction between European-level fiscal rules and national level, which is where much of the push has been. The third problem is implementation. It's all very well to have this wonderfully designed rule, but if it's not followed, then what good is it? And the implementation challenge, to me, is the biggest one. Now, here I'd like to pick up something that Luca said in the last session, because her idea of a sustainability pact is far more clever than maybe even she realized, because the word sustainability is capable of multiple interpretations. It can be environmental, it can be macroeconomically sustainable, it can be socially sustainable. And if you can merge all these strands of sustainability into one word, you're likely to have a more potential for a rule to pass through different layers of decision making. And it's an advantage in governance if France sees it one way, Italy sees it a second way, and Germany sees it a third way, but all subscribe to the word sustainability. So that's one positive suggestion in what so far has been a gloomy panel. Then on the question of new instruments, we have an underlying problem in this, which is worthy of Joseph Heller, the author of Catch-22, which is that if you have any fiscal stabilization mechanism that is big enough to be effective, it's going to be resisted by those who find it politically unacceptable. And if it's going to be politically acceptable, it has to be small enough not to cause any difficulty for the net contributor countries, in particular the Germans and this strange new grouping we have called the Hanseatics. The Hanseatics being the former Baltic Sea ports, but for some strange reason they include the Czech Republic and the Slovak Republic, which are completely landlocked. Now, whether we can realistically get towards some sort of Frankfurt response for Naples. I look forward to Pizza Frankfurt and Napoli Wurst. These are horrible prospects if you think about it. If we're going to get some form of fiscal stabilisation mechanism, you need it to be in a volume, a scale sufficient to make a difference. The beguiling one is a European Unemployment Insurance Fund, that's already been mentioned by Panos. It looks attractive because it seems to put together a stabilisation capability with some sort of social intervention. Somehow it's targeting those who suffer from the consequences of an economic downturn. But the only realistic way I can see for this to happen, having just published a paper yesterday on it, is for the European Unemployment Insurance Fund to be a form of reinsurance that Maria already mentioned. In other words, it doesn't go directly to the unemployed, but tops up national schemes which are struggling because of cyclical downturns. The catch then is going to be not just all the technical things about under what circumstances is it triggered, because you could say that in the case of Spain, the normal, if there is such a thing, unemployment rate may be 11%, in Germany it may be 4%, in the Czech Republic we heard this morning it's 3%. If the Czechs go up from 3 to 4, that's a cyclical downturn. If the Germans go from 4 to 5, that's a cyclical downturn. And if the Spanish go from 11 to 10, that's a cyclical upturn. So you get Spanish unemployed paying for German unemployed under a system which they have very disparate unemployment rates. And that would seem bizarre for a country with low unemployment to be gaining money from a country with high unemployment. That could be the outcome of design. Now, in reinsurance, the big challenge is if a government receives from such a fund, what's the guarantee that it will use it for Keynesian purposes to stimulate the economy? They could just say, they could just bank it and say, we'll reduce debt with it. And I suspect that would be the big temptation in Italy, to run down the debt with any transfer rather than to spend it for counter-cyclical purposes. So we have a lot of detail in this that needs to be worked out, even though we can probably all agree as a general principle that some additional capacity at European level is needed. This is where detail matters, and that is where I think the whole debate is stuck, because one side still says control risks first, and then we'll think about sharing risks, and the other side says we need you to share the risks to enable us to control them, and this again is a catch-22. Sequencing is not something that we really talked about seriously, in which order to do the things. And that's the governance challenge that we currently face.
Okay, good, thank you. That's been very clear indeed. I'm going to, in a moment, come to the audience and ask for questions and contributions, because there's many people here who can help to take the debate forward. Let me pick up on one or two things. We've had quite a variety of views expressed. Just one particular point, Maria, if I could come to you. I understood you to be saying that we can't have the kind of economic governance which would involve significant fiscal transfers, because there isn't the legitimacy there for it. And indeed, somehow we need to ask the people. Ask the people. This might be very much a Brit asking the question here, but are you advocating some kind of referendum here? How do we ask the people? Where does the legitimacy come from, if not simply a shift of governmental opinion? And how do we get there?
Oh, dear God, no. No referendum, no, please not. No, this is not what I'm advocating for, but this is much more of a thought experiment, actually, what I was doing here. If you're going to have money being shifted at the center of Europe, being raised and spent at the center of Europe, then you have to have some democratic legitimacy for that. This issue is a difficult issue because it relies to notions like identity, European identity. Are we ready to go in that direction? And I would like to go in this direction, but I fear that in my generation we're not going to have a European identity over and above a national identity, which surpasses that. So I think it's important to think in those terms before we go down that route. Now, can we do things before that? Yes, I can. As we can do things more than that. And I think the unemployment reinsurance is really the most realistic one. And I certainly agree that this issue of design details are very important. They go in that direction without having to enter the discussions of identity and democratic legitimacy. And they could be actually quite effective. We have actually published something on this as well, where we do the experiment and we examine where is the right threshold which you could draw from that type of insurance. You raise the money and then you use them. And we can actually demonstrate that the crisis years would have been really padded if such a mechanism existed. Here is a very constructive, in my view, way that we could take the discussion forward without having to think about fiscal transfers that could potentially end up being permanent. This would be a very wrong thing to do, but little things like what we described here on the unemployment reinsurance can be very productive.
Okay, thanks. I wonder, Claudio, what I heard from you is to say we can't fix it, but it seemed to be a question of a rather incompatible trinity, if I could use such a phrase. That is that we have no real fiscal transfers, fiscal rules not being consistently implemented, and we can't expect donor states or contributing states to create such a budget. So could I just ask, how do you see the Eurozone governance going forward if we're simply accepting these as givens?
We have to understand that at the moment the divide between donors and receivers is not linked to cycle, because it's linked to average wealth of the country. So it means that there could well be that there is a country with lower national wages that is in sharp growth, for example 6%, that still receive money from a country maybe like Italy, even if it's in recession. So it's, these fiscal transfers are not intended in a way that we think regarding the counter-cyclical balance of it. It's more like what we have in Italy. In Italy, we know very well how it works, because there is a big divide between the south of Italy and the north of Italy. But there is a big contribution from the north of Italy to the south of Italy. It's in the region of 80 billion per year, the fiscal transfer from north of Italy within a single country. So imagine the magnitude of the fiscal transfer that should be needed euro-wide in order to make up for this kind of divide between the wealth of the different regional area. How I see? Well, usually what we have seen at the moment, even in the middle of the crisis, is that the whole euro system loves to stay in denial. So they see that there is a problem. Probably everyone knows that there is a problem, but they kick the can. Unless there is the moment where they are on the brink of the disaster, then they come up with something. For example, it was clearly evident when they imposed the PSI on Greek debt, that this is going to be contagious, because if an asset that was supposed to be risk-free, like a Eurozone government debt, it becomes risky, well, people start thinking, well, maybe my Spanish bond, my Italian bond is the next in line. So it created the spread. Then it goes uncontrollable. It started, you know, once you take the genie out of the bottle, it is very, very difficult to put it back. And you have to be at the brink of the disaster to come out with whatever it takes. So, but whatever it takes doesn't solve forever the problem. That instead is, for example, the central bank doesn't allow to have more than 150 basis points of difference between two bonds within the Eurozone. That is going to solve forever, because it means that there is a stigma if ever you go on one side, because 150 basis points it's a lot, but you don't risk to stay out of the market. it's possible to implement this, that is going to be sensible and is going to be, solve at the root the problem of the risking of the debt of Eurozone. I don't think so, because it's going to be seen as, well, it's moral hazard, then you will start implementing, I don't know, unrestrained fiscal bonanza that ultimately we have to pay and something like this. So unless we face the real root of the problem and then we close in a room and find out how to solve them, either I think that we are going to kick the can again and again, and with some, they will find out with a funny acronym, for example, I don't know, the RSPQ or something like this, that doesn't mean, I don't know, for some scheme that will not solve the problem until the next crisis.
Okay, as I say, I'm going to come to the audience for contributions in a moment. I wonder, Panos, if I could ask Panos Tsakloglou a question here, that if in the future the Eurozone was to develop a much greater fiscal capacity, then of course some have suggested linking things. 2017, there was the so-called non-paper from Wolfgang Schäuble saying that fiscal transfers should be related to the record of governments in terms of domestic structural reform. Maria, I think, raised the point about the quality of domestic institutions to deliver reform. Do you think this tie between fiscal transfers, but on the basis of whether governments deliver reform, is a productive one for the Eurozone as a whole?
First of all, let me clarify something. When I was talking about transfers earlier on in my talk, I was talking only about cyclical stabilization. I was not referring to kind of permanent transfers or anything. The kind of effectively, this is, let's say, some kind of transfer system that Kevin implied there. I have the feeling that this can go in two directions. One that is currently discussed in the European Union. It is, let's say, to give extra resources to countries that are implementing structural reforms. This is an argument. However, I cannot easily see which are the structural reforms that will require funding as such. I can understand, for instance, we have a country where we must strengthen, let's say, technical education or something like this, and as a result we need different infrastructures, and we get, let's say, some extra resources from Europe. But I cannot really think of several such reforms that will require European funding. On the contrary, I have a feeling that there is another type of projects that sooner or later may be financed by something that will resemble a Eurobond. These are infrastructure projects of European importance, particularly cross-country projects and so on. If we start from somewhere, I have the feeling that most probably we will start from this type of projects. And having said that, I do not underestimate the importance of structural reforms. All these things that we were mentioning before about transforming Naples into Frankfurt and so on, this is a decision that will be taken in Italy, and this is something that will be supported by Italian resources. This is not something that you should anticipate, some kind of, I don't know, transfer of resources. It is, let's say. Okay. So, to summarize what I mentioned before, yes, there is some room for funding of structural reforms with European money in the way that we were talking about some form of a Eurobond. However, I have the feeling that most probably it will start with something that will support infrastructural projects of common importance, and most probably the first ones will be cross-border projects.
Iain, you mentioned about sustainability and that we should have sustainability defined in different ways, a broad conception, etc. This seems to be a kind of creative ambiguity that we might live with, but a kind of, doesn't this risk a kind of pretend scenario that, and indeed a scenario of ambiguity, which led us into the crisis in the first place.
No, it's the contrary. I think that what you're trying to do is to say there are different ambitions that we need to reconcile. A strong rule-based system exerts downward fiscal pressure. A rule-based system which doesn't have flexibility in it or break clauses is one which prevents necessary action of the sort that Italy is struggling with at the moment. Italy is saying we need to do certain things. We cannot do it under the existing rules. Therefore, we need to have a wider conception, and maybe that's social sustainability in this case, because Italy is on the cusp of certain social difficulties which could imperil basic economic growth. So it's in that sense, it's worth having different definitions tied up together. And also, both of us have political economy in our background here. You need a bit of ambiguity in the way things are expressed to enable people to sign up to it. If they don't, and one side has a very rigid view of it, it isn't going to work. This is also the case of something that slipped by earlier, the macroeconomic imbalances, which still are a major problem for the Eurozone, given the scale of Germany's surplus in its external account, which sucks demand out of the system. If Germany is not taken to task on that, because it's found a way of avoiding it, then there's the difficulty you mentioned. But if Germany also says, we need a surplus with the rest of the world because we're growing our economy, we need to provide for long-term fiscal sustainability, then there's another reason for it. So you need to be subtle on these things, not think that there are hard categories.
Okay, a subtle fudge, I think, is the phrase we might use in that respect.
With plenty of sugar.
Let me open it up then to contributions. I think there may be someone with a microphone, or you may have a microphone. There's a microphone coming. Can we take the gentleman here, just next to you now? Just forward, here. Thank you. Could you just say who you are and give a quick...
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Konstantinos Achilles Kanelopoulos. I'm a doctoral researcher, John Monnet Fellow at the University of Manchester, also a political economist here. I have a question with regards, John F. Kennedy once said that the time to build the roof is when the sun is shining. To what extent, as the euro is entering its third decade, to what extent do you think that we have taken the necessary measures, both in terms of crisis prevention and in terms of crisis management, to be adequately prepared for the next financial crisis that strikes?
Okay.
And I was wondering whether you agree with Philippe Legren on the point that the next crisis might prove to be the catalyst to develop a fully fledged federal union in the Eurozone. Thank you.
Thank you. Then there's someone behind you, I think, with... Yes.
Hi, this is a question for Dr. Borghi. We have met before. We discussed BOTs for 2 hours last time.
It's fine.
But
if you just give us a question rather than your social life.
You described how the European setup right now is anti-growth with higher deficits, more austerity, etc. If you agree that Italy finds itself in that situation right now, with the budget that has forecast growth positive and we're in recession, does what you just said imply that your government stance is going to be looking at ECB financing of infrastructure, etc., as the solution to the current juncture as well, or how will this government react?
Okay, thanks. Other contributions? Please, Jean Pisani-Ferry. Way over here, please. It's coming.
Thank you. It's a question to Claudio Borghi. You said that peaceful divorce is the best solution. So I know it's not part of the program of the current coalition, but as a politician, you have to think about what comes next. So the Italian people seem unconvinced for the time being. What's the way you think you should convince them that the good solution is to go to Germany and to tell the partners, let's divorce?
Thank you. Any other question? And the gentleman just behind.
Hi, Daniel Furby from the European Law and Governance School in Athens. Just picking up on the point about structural reform, this is a common narrative in Brussels and in the Five Presidents' Report and all the Brussels documents, and it's often linked with convergence. Now, I'm not an economist, I'm a historian, but my question is, what level of convergence is realistic from structural reform? Because surely it's not going to solve the problem of divergent competitiveness across the Eurozone. So it can't be the only solution, but it's the main one that you hear in Brussels. So I'd be interested from economic experts on that question.
Okay. Any other contribution? Oh, there's someone over here, please. This will be the final question.
Hello. I'd just like to ask, if there was the scenario that there was a political and public support for a fiscal union, do you think that this would be still plausible given the differences in the different models of capitalism existing in the different countries in Europe? So you have more coordinated market economies with increased social protections and more liberal market economies. So even if there was the necessary support, is it a realistic thing?
Okay, many thanks. We're limited with time. I'm going to invite each of our speakers to respond to any particular question they wish, but not necessarily all questions. Claudio, there were some questions which were directed to you. Do you want to kick off?
Yes. How is going to convince her to divorce? Well, at the moment, the only thing that I see feasible is if Germany wish to go. Because at the moment, we have seen, as I said, that unilateral is not realistic. The only way that I can see unilateral as realistic is in the middle of a disaster. So if ever there is a situation that is going to be unsustainable, social, economically, banking, in a way, a sort of Greece reloaded, that probably it was the closest point that we have seen in the past of a possible moment of divorce, the referendum that we do remember. But in standard terms is impossible. So the only way is to find a way in order, if we come to this way of thinking, that is better to think elsewhere, and is to split in two. And how you basically wrote something that was the European Solidarity Manifesto long ago that show how it could be done.
Okay.
And basically to split in two, the easiest way is if ever we are going to implement some change in the Eurozone that make Germany think that they are not happy anymore here.
That's fine, Claudio. Panos, briefly.
Yeah, very briefly. In the first question of Mr. Kannaropoulos, I'm very much afraid that we wasted our time. After the crisis, there was stalemate for a very long period of time, and I have the feeling that we must wait for the next crisis. If I can, very quickly, I do not think that there is any possibility for a peaceful divorce. From some point of view, I have the feeling that the euro is like Hotel California. You can get in, but we cannot get out. Even at the mentioning that we intend to get out of the euro, the bond market will punish the country, will say this thing enormously the next day. Finally, regarding the question of structural reforms, of course, there are several good examples about it. There is a country in the European periphery called Ireland. Ireland was substantially poorer than even Greece. They implemented loads of structural reforms. See where Ireland is nowadays. It is second richest country in GDP per capita after Luxembourg. If you go outside Europe, you can say several other examples, the Four Tigers, etc., etc. All of them had one common characteristic, and this is this thing that Maria mentioned before. Good governance, good institutions. This is where we should aim at.
Maria.
On the financial crisis, actually, yes, if we were to meet the same financial crisis that we meet, if we were to meet it again, we are much better prepared. The sovereign loop and the bank is reduced. The only country where this is not reduced is Italy. The rest of Europe is much better prepared in this respect. We have now in place legislation which is going to increase the market risk sharing. So yes, if we're going to meet the same financial crisis down the road, we're much better prepared. But we're not going to meet the next crisis is not going to be the same crisis as we've met. So as always, we are much better prepared for the things of the past. Nothing guarantees that we are better prepared for things of the future. And this is where I think the first realization is that change happens, unfortunately, in leaps and bounds. It doesn't happen in a continuous fashion. By that I mean that you have to have a very big shock before you change, just like you quit smoking only when you have a heart attack, not before that. I think it's a very unfortunate thing and a very disappointing one, but unfortunately we don't change when we need to, we change only when we have to. But what I think I would advocate for policies that cater for many circumstances, with many different outcomes. This would be a better way of ensuring against the possibility of uncertainty.
Iain.
I'll try to pick up what's left. Will the next crisis be a catalyst for a federal Europe? No. Simple answer. And I entirely agree with Maria that all our generals are very well equipped to fight the last war. They're just not very good at anticipating the next war. What you may see, however, is a drift towards fiscal union. And then the next question automatically is, what does fiscal union mean? There are at least 6 different definitions of fiscal union. I think it's going to entail a degree of increase in fiscal stabilization capabilities, maybe a budget, instead of being measured in hundreds of millions, going to billions of euros, able to perform a stabilization function, but it'd be very small steps getting along the way. And to Alex's question about varieties of capitalism, you can tell he's a European Institute PhD student, master's student, because he mentions varieties of capitalism, which we're always going on about. No, I don't think the varieties of capitalism idea is that there are certain types of economy in Europe which are better equipped and certain ones which are less well equipped is a sufficient explanation for what goes wrong. In each case, it's idiosyncratic. I did some work in Italy a couple of years ago, and I asked the question, why does Italy have so much trouble getting out of this 0% growth that Claudio mentioned? And the answer that came back to me time and time again wasn't anything to do with the Italian economy. It was Italian public administration is such a heavy weight on the system that it doesn't allow for the dynamism that you need to generate economic growth. That's also been the case in Greece in the past. There are other countries where you can say there are different diagnoses. So we need to look country by country at this, rather than thinking we can say there are certain classes of countries which are good at it and certain countries which are bad at it, because that also evolves over time. And these 2 variables need to be put together and try to understand this.
Okay, thank you. We've covered a large agenda. I wonder if, I can see we still have 2 minutes and 16 seconds left. I wonder if I can just go right across the panel very quickly and say that in 5 years' time, would you expect the same countries to be in the Eurozone? Yes or no? Panos.
I think they will be there. If if there is no disaster where there will be, let's say, the destruction of the Eurozone, I have the feeling the same countries will be there. In fact, there may be some more there.
Claudio?
No.
Maria?
Yes.
Iain?
No, because I think we will see at least Bulgaria and Romania pressing to join within 5 years. A difficulty in that the European Central Bank will be reluctant to have them, but the political pressures will be strong. And if they start to come, then even Denmark might reconsider.
Okay, many thanks. Let me thank the Forum for inviting us to have this seminar. It's a large topic. We've touched on some issues. Can you please thank the panel for their contribution?
Εμείς σας ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ και για την τήρηση των χρόνων. Είναι πολύ σημαντικό αυτό για τη ροή του προγράμματος. Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ. Και καλώ αμέσως τον κύριο Μαγκυριάδη, συντονιστή της επόμενης συζήτησης. Δεν υπάρχει διάλειμμα, προχωράμε αμέσως. Τι γίνεται, καλά.
Θα πάρω και 2-3 ερωτήσεις από το